Hey, what's going on, everyone? Justin here, and in this video we're going to go over the 10 longest books that I read in 2024, and this is not going to be the last of the book list of 2024, so you must buckle up and get ready, because I got a whole bunch more where this one's coming from. But I am really pleased with, I guess with 2024, I read about the same number of books I'd normally do, was just over 100, but I think the pages, the average page count was like 20 or 30 pages like longer, and it's probably because of these like 10 books right here. But let's just go ahead, get right started in no particular order. First up, we got Judith Herron's Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe, and this was a really fun book on late antiquity, which is probably one of my favorite time periods, especially in ancient history and that kind of thing. But this is the weird transitional period, roughly like 300 to 700, as I think usually what people kind of roughly estimated at, CE, where you kind of have the fall of the classical world and kind of moving into the early Middle Ages and that kind of thing. But this book takes a look at that time period through the lens of the city of Ravenna in northern Italy, which was the capital of the Western Roman Empire for a little bit of time. But you hear about all kinds of crazy emperors and their wives, Galla, Placidia, Zoe, anyone, you know, if you read on like late antiquity, the fall of the Roman Empire, you'll hear about some of them. But included are some of my favorite like warlords as well, such as Aetius and Stilicho. They're in here. But you get a bunch of different stuff, a lot of cultural things. There's like a famous the geographer of Ravenna, who had like this giant map of the world and a writing to go along with it. You get a lot of stuff like that, and then obviously some of the weird theological inclinations of like kind of the early Middle Ages, where there's a bunch of different Christian sects kind of going around, and then you got like obviously the big divisions between East and West starting to really take form. But highly recommended. There's also lots of really good plates as well. Throughout, obviously Justinian and Theodora is like super famous for like antiquity, but you get plenty of them throughout. Ravenna, well known for its mosaics and architecture and stuff. Lovely cover showing off that kind of stuff. Next up, let's just go with this one randomly. So all these ones are over 500 pages. I think this one is like 600, but it looks really small for whatever reason. The pages are just like super high quality but thin. And it's Eric Larson's The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. And as it says on the tin there, it's all about this sort of generation and kind of life and times of the year leading up to the bombing and artillery shelling of Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor to kind of kick off the American Civil War in 1861. But you kind of take a look through a couple of different primary accounts. Like there's a kind of the aristocratic society in Charleston, kind of behind the scenes of Abraham Lincoln's election campaign, stuff like that, as well as the commanders of like Fort Sumter and kind of what's going on there. I found it really interesting. I don't read a lot on the Civil War. I can probably only think of like 5 or 6 books that I've read. This is definitely the best one that I've read so far. Eric Larson, just like I said, he does a great job using primary sources to kind of graft together and like weave a really nice tapestry on the events that he writes about. So I probably will pick up some of the other ones that I have not read of his, but if you enjoy Civil War history, definitely check that one out. Next up, we got a science book. Out of all these 10 books, only one science and one fiction made onto the list. Granted, I know 500 pages isn't really much for like fiction people, but I think for non-fiction, 500 pages is quite a book. But yeah, just a lot of science reads. A lot of my science and nature reads really just don't like get that long, but this one did, and it's The Gene, an Intimate History by Siddhartha Mukherjee. Super fantastic. It's obvious why he won the Pulitzer for The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a biography of cancer. Next up, I'm definitely going to be picking up his Song of the Cell, because I have heard that there's not actually a lot of overlap between this one and Song of the Cell, which I kind of thought maybe there might be, but just super beautifully written, just really down to earth, and he explains all these kind of like challenging, difficult, complicated things dealing with DNA and genetics and the genome and stuff, just in lay people's terms, and it comes across really well. You grasp the information, you learn it, and then you get entertained as well. So it's kind of like a history and a science book combined into one. It was just really fun to learning about, like I said, I've said it before, like just some of the ethical conferences when people were starting to realize what could be done with genetics and genetic manipulation and genetic splicing and all that kind of stuff. And they were like, well, we should probably like have like some rules on this, shouldn't we? And there was a bit of a rancor a couple of times on those events, but yeah, highly encourage that if you like science writing. Next up is, I think this is definitely the densest book. It's not quite the longest. This one actually doesn't look that big either, but I think it's like 800 something pages. Yeah, 870 something if you count the footnotes and the index. We got 873. This is by far though the brickiest one. This was just so dense. Revolutionary Spring, Europe Aflame and the Fight for a New World, 1848 to 1849 by Christopher Clark. Picked this one up because I had read The Pursuit of Power, which will be, I might as well do that one next. And I really enjoyed it. That one's all about the long 19th century, and this is like smack dab in the middle of the long 19th century here. Just Europe just went haywire in the years starting with 1848. All kinds of countries are starting to do stuff. You got France, you got Portugal, you got, I think, Sweden. I think there was like 30 other countries. You know, Germany's doing stuff. I want to say Spain, Italy. They're all either revolting or striking, rioting, having literal pitched battles, you know, and kind of, you know, setting up the stages for some coup d'etats later on and everything. I will say, it's like I said, it's super dense. The author does a good job explaining things. It's just the pacing is just like bang, 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 bang. Like it's just non-stop. There's almost like no breaks. I will say the author does a good job too, though, of kind of incorporating primary source material as well. I feel like he's definitely like a master of like all the sources like in the 1900s and stuff like that. But yeah, this is definitely not, I would not say this is like for a casual read. If you want to like kind of learn about some of those revolutions and stuff, probably wouldn't like super recommend it unless you're already kind of versed in European history during the 1800s. I know I wasn't steeped quite enough probably to get the most out of this book. I felt like I spent too much time either like looking other people up or not bothering to look other people up and maybe missing out and that kind of thing. But still a good book for what it is. I do recommend it if that's something you want to read about. And then might as well bring up The Pursuit of Power, Europe 1815 to 1914 by Richard Evans. And this is in the Penguin History of Europe. And I just picked this one up for March of the Mammoths earlier in 2024. Really glad I did. I want to say this one's like 800, just over 800. So I think it like barely qualified. I think 819. Super glad I read this. I knew a little bit about like the 1800s just from like other stuff and whatnot and a few other things I've read, but this book has made me want to like get more books on the long 19th century, which is generally considered the period between the end of Napoleon's era and the beginning of World War I. It's not quite exactly, you know, the 1800s perfectly, but pretty close, pretty good like 100-year century there. But yeah, this was super fantastic because it alternates between like political, military, history, narrative stuff, and then a bunch of like kind of more social, cultural, scientific things. It was just really fun, like learning about all the different kind of advances and like kind of technological revolutions that were happening kind of concurrently with all the political upheaval and all that kind of stuff. Super highly recommended. Like I said, I read this one that made me want to read more stuff in the 1800s, so I like kind of ended up getting this one as well to kind of go along with it. So super readable, super highly recommended. This was definitely like one of my favorites for the year. So one that I guess I never would have pictured myself reading. Super highly recommend this one as well for anyone who likes Russian literature. I know Russia's like kind of like in the ether a lot right now with all the stuff that they're doing. But a lot of people have been reading, I guess people always are like reading Tolstoy and like Dostoevsky and stuff. But I've seen like a lot of Russian literature like lately in Russian histories. Definitely check out The Soviet Century Archaeology of a Lost World by Karl Schlogel. This is a social history of what it was like to live under the USSR, pretty much during the entire history from, you know, its foundations in the 20s all the way up to kind of its like fall and collapse. You know, in like the past generation or so. So I found it really interesting. You get into like the nitty gritty of certain things, such as like, you know, interior design. What did people actually have in their apartments? How did you end up actually living in like a crowded like Soviet bloc apartment? Like the kind of the the drawing lots just to like get in there. Then having to share your like, you know, your apartment with like other people and everything. We also learn about other stuff such as like museums. I think is pretty early on. Like there's just tons of like local museums like throughout the USSR that were commemorating different stuff. But it's just kind of real, like I said, just really interesting to hear about how just the everyday person, what they actually had to kind of put up with, like under the Soviet system, which obviously was not ideal, and some of the darker stuff too, like the gulags, and labor camps and public works projects are discussed as well. And this is a pretty monstrous, like monumental work as well. Just under 900 pages. It's broken down into like, I think I'll have to look it up. It's like 50 or 60 sub-chapters. I want to say, yeah, 60 or so sub-chapters. So you can kind of like read a couple, take a break, read a couple, take a break. I think I read this one in about like 3 blocks. So I think I read about like 250 pages like each time, something like that. Every time I went into it, but super highly recommended if you want to learn more about Russian history, Soviet culture, that kind of stuff. All right, now I might as well just talk about the one random fiction one is sitting right in front of me, and it's the Kalevala, which is the Finnish like epic poem that has come down to us. Was it Elias? What was his last name? Who assembled it? Oh man, now I feel like a nitwit. Elias Alonrot in 1849, and it's translated out of that Finnish edition into English. I found it super fun. Actually, if you want to hear me doing a little rendition of like one of the stanzas, check out my one of my last videos there. I'll put a link up there where I ended up doing that for a little bit. Anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just feel like this one has a lot of rhythm, and the way the translation like works, even though it's in English, it's not obviously going to be perfect. I just felt like it just flowed so well. You can actually hear like how it would be like kind of like sung and everything, like if you were just like having a great time like at a feast or a banquet or something like that. I just really enjoyed it. So if you like any kind of epic poetry, definitely give this one a shot. Like I said, if you like the Nibelungenlied, you like Homer, anything like that, I would say give this one a shot as well. So probably my least favorite of these 10, if I really had to pick one here, is The Fall of Civilizations by Paul Cooper, Stories of Greatness and Decline. Even though it's like a nice 600-page tome on all kinds of different civilizations and their fall, there was, I don't know, it was just missing some kind of, I don't know, like central narrative like thread to kind of tie everything together. Because what you actually end up reading is like, is it 14 or 16? 14 different civilizations, and they're kind of like decline and fall or collapse. But they're almost so standalone. Like, I really don't think you'd miss anything by just skipping around and reading like the cultures that you want to read about. I will say I do like how he included a lot of Eastern stuff, a lot of South American stuff, and other cultures that you don't normally get. For example, like Carthage, Han China, the Khmer Empire, the Mayans, and the Inca, Easter Island. So it's not just it's not just like Rome. Even like when Rome is included in this one, I think it's like Rome and Britain more so than like Rome itself, as an example. So I will say his selections are very good, but like I said, it definitely feels very podcasty, because that's what apparently he has a podcast known as Fall of Civilizations, and I feel like it kind of feels that way. Like each one is kind of just very I guess isolated, and can, like I said, can just be kind of read as a one-off. And I think he even mentions that in the introduction or something, that's like a possibility to read it. But I don't know, I feel like with a 600-page book, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it when you're kind of dealing with the same theme. It should just be kind of tied together a little bit more. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Next up, I was going to save it for last. We're going to save it for second last. I feel like Sid already kind of won my favorite book of the year. We got Polis, A New History of the Ancient Greek City-State from the Early Iron Age to the End of Antiquity by John Ma. I just really enjoyed it because I love reading about Greek history. I love ancient Greek, classical Greek culture and everything like that. And this is like kind of a new reworking of our concept of the polis. Not so much as in like what's different about a polis, but a little bit more about how as a concept, as an actual functioning political unit, it lasted a lot longer than we kind of give it credit for. Usually we kind of say, like, after the Macedonian hegemony, the kind of conquest under Philip and Alexander, and then followed by, the Roman Republic and then Imperial Rome, the polis was effectively, just defunct and didn't really exist. And John Ma does make a pretty good argument of how a lot of these polities still, like, at least internally, obviously, like, externally, they couldn't, like, make a lot of decisions and stuff, still function much as a classical polis did. I think some parts of it maybe could be argued a little bit better, or I guess you can't really make the argument better. I don't think they come up to snuff as much as, like, some of the other arguments. But overall, like I said, I just really enjoyed reading about the polis, and how they kind of differed and tried to do a lot of different polis, how they were able to kind of survive and continue going on, century after century, despite, being, like, overlorded by tons of different power, obviously with Rome being the major one there. And one thing I really enjoyed about this is he talks about pretty much all kinds of polis all over the Mediterranean world, not just the big names. I don't know, just if you really like Greek culture, I think you'll really enjoy this book. And then lastly, I'm saving this one for last because I don't think I mentioned it in my top 10 book, but I feel like it should have been a good honorable mention. And it's The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 to 1790 by Richie Robertson. And I did read this as a buddy read with some friends, and I feel like this is definitely my favorite buddy read of the year. I think this one's about 900 pages of actual text. It's about 950. Well, I say that. Look at the footnotes here. Holy cow. I do remember just, like, kind of discussing all these, like, minor characters, all these, like, other characters during the Enlightenment period. This is also, like, another area where I don't know tons and tons about. I feel like the author did a tremendous job, though, explaining all the different things kind of going on, all the cultural advancements, all the scientific stuff, all the religious turmoil, all the changes, all the players, and in such a way where I almost feel like I didn't even have to look up a lot of them. He just explained them, like, so well, they could stand on their own in the text themselves. And there are a few things I do want to look up based on my reading of this book, most notably the encyclopedia and Denis Diderot. Doing that, I feel like I need to find a good biography of, like, him and his writing on the National Encyclopedia. I just think that'd be really fun as well. Highly encourage anyone that's interested in the 1700s, anything like that. Definitely check this one out for sure. So there you have it. Those are the biggest books that I read in 2024. Let me know which ones down below you think sound the most interesting, and also what the longest book that you read in 2024, what that one was. I'd be interested to hear what everyone else has been reading for long tomes. But whatever you're reading, whether it's short or long, always remember, read victoriously.